Hey David, this is Matt Singer. How are
Hey,
you?
Matt.
Greetings from the Gulf Coast.
Greetings.
I just want to let you know and some other people that might be interested that are also on this Zoom meeting that we're closing on 79 acres of the Angleton Flo Hannah Prairie this Friday. So that's a big win for prairies. We've been working really hard to get as much of that prairie conserved as possible. So I know a few people on this screen have been out there and have seen the tall grass prairie out there. It's a really spectacular piece of land. So one step closer.
Nice job. You did that with Jason Singhurst, is that right?
Mike Lang.
Well, yeah, Mike Lang's been negotiating a portion of that, and then my boss Bob Stokes negotiated a lot of the contract for this 79-acre purchase. But Jason's been out there. He helped David Bezanson and David Rosen describe some of that prairie, and it's funded through a NACA grant that we've secured.
I think in terms of difficulty per acre, that deal might be one of the worst parts.
We've been working on that for about 7 years now.
Mm-hmm.
So.
Yeah, I'll give a shout out to Mr. Glenn Mercord, who I think may have been the first person to identify that remnant a long time ago. And
that's where that all started, was the grant and the effort they did to identify remnant prairies throughout the state by driving up and down public roads. And he identified this hay meadow as a potential prairie worthy of conservation. And that started the whole process. So thanks to Glenn.
yeah, fantastic prairie too. Bring the acreage total to, or will.
Well, we accomplished 35 acres last year, so it'll be 114 total acres there of the original Tigner property, and we'll add, hopefully add by the end of the year or early next year, an additional 10 acres. So we'll have 124 acres total of the original 165 acres that we targeted. So.
Is that all adjacent?
Those are all contiguous tracts.
Mm-hmm.
In partnership with Katy Prairie Conservancy, we're going to be doing some work out there to bring people to the prairie to do some seed harvest and maybe even some live transplant harvests, but definitely seed for restoration purposes. And soon after we get the additional 10 acres, we'll put a conservation easement over the entirety of that conserved 124 acres, and that will be held by the Brazoria National Wildlife Refuge. The U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service will hold that easement, so they can then help with management and use that as a seed source for restoration on their property as well. So it's a big joint effort there.
Yeah, that's going to be a big win. That's going to be huge.
A lot of partners for a 100-acre piece of property.
That's good.
Yeah.
So with that, I want to introduce our speaker tonight is David Bezanson, who is the Land Protection and Easement Manager for the Nature Conservancy. He works to acquire preserves and conservation easements statewide. He previously served as Executive Director of the Texas Land Conservancy, which is another Texas land trust that has 80,000 acres under conservation. He is also working on a book about natural plant communities of Texas and conservation priorities. That sounds right up our group's alley, David. So I hope that you will keep us informed about that book. I'm sure that we will all be really interested when it comes out. So with no further ado, I turn the meeting over to you. We look forward to your presentation.
Thank you. It's good to see y'all. Good to see a lot of familiar faces. I can't see everyone right now, but can y'all hear me fine?
Yes.
All good?
Yes.
Well, so people are still joining. So I'll just kind of start by talking a little bit about my role at the Nature Conservancy. I'm the Protection and Easement Manager, and for the Texas chapter statewide. And so that means buying, selling, trading land, and doing conservation easements, and a lot of easements. And y'all know that prairies are a big part of my focus, but actually I do work in every corner of the state. And so this presentation is prairie centric, but I did kind of touch on a few other projects, because what I really wanted to try to communicate is the various multifarious kinds of conservation methods that we have, funding, and as well as donation. And there are too many to touch on all of them. And, you know, Matt and a bunch of other people on this call are familiar with all the tricks, but wanted to kind of mention a few of the major categories, I guess, and illustrate them with some of the recent projects that we've done in prairie conservation. This picture that you are looking at that's the Red River, and that is looking at the Red River from the BARTUSH Ranch. And the BARTUSH Ranch does have a large component of native prairie, and that was a conservation easement that we closed in January, which I will talk more about in a moment. And now I think we can move to the first slide.
Sorry.
No problem. And so I wanted to start with a few basics. I don't have the chat in front of me, so Mary, if you'll let me know if there's anything in the chat, I'll stop whenever. So I think this actually is the third slide.
Yes, sorry about that.
Seemed like there was another slide in there.
Yes, yes.
Ah, yeah. So this, just some basics, because context is good. Texas is enormous. We are number 2 in population, as well as size. We are number 1 in population growth in a certain range, or I guess that's in absolute numbers. But in parkland and open space, we are number 16. And parkland is a percentage of our land base. We are 32. And that comes out to 2.5% of Texas in some kind of conservation. And that does add up to a lot of land in raw terms, but it's far, far less than the other most populous states. California, that number is 25%,
Wow.
and more than half of the state is public land of some kind. Florida, it's between 10 and 20%. You know, so the point being, there is a lot more conservation land in some of these other states, even though they have almost as many people as Texas. And that means that we are not able to conserve all of the biodiversity of the state as we would like to do. Also, as y'all know, some parts of the state are underserved. Most of our conservation land is pretty far west. Next slide. And bringing that into prairies, most of Texas is grassland of some kind. Della's asking, does the protected percentage include easements? Yeah, and it does. It's still not very big. Easements are a big chunk of it. So prairie conservation, so yes, most of Texas is grassland of some type. Even West Texas is grassland. Pretty much everything except the piney woods, you know, would be a stretch. But the coastal prairies, the Blackland prairies, the high plains, the rolling plains, South Texas, really, even the Edwards Plateau. And the protected land in those regions is less than that average because a lot of it is far west and east. And there are, as y'all know very well, there are no large protected native prairies in the state of Texas. And I'm not even sure what the largest one would be. Atwater Prairie Chicken is pretty, decent size. It's a great site, but that might be the answer. And it's 2,000 or 3,000 acres. So, compared to what some other states have got, we don't have very much that's on that scale. Next slide. Here's what it looks like on a map. These are the conservation lands of Texas, and this is pretty up to date, and it's got some good things that we just completed and that a lot of other people have just completed. And there's also a few newer things which are not on this map yet, actually looking at it, and there's a few things missing that we'll talk about. But anyway, you can see there's actually some pretty nice splotches of territory, and again, a lot of them are out west. You've got the Big Bend Ranch, Chinattis, Davis Mountains, Guadalupe, the Guads. You've got up in the Panhandle a few large projects like Canadian Breaks and Lake Meredith and Paladura. Hill country, mostly small, quite a bit of conservation, but not real big. City of San Antonio actually has got a pretty big footprint. Those are conservation easements there. And then on the coast, of course, there's been some pretty significant conservation over the years, and Padre Island, Aransas, Matagorda, Brazoria, San Bernard, and all the rest, Columbia Bottomlands, Powderhorn, and McFadden. And then in East Texas, there's actually some pretty big blocks too. And there's a lot more potential there because there's land is still in pretty big blocks. But look in the middle of the state, where the prairies are, at least where the tall grass prairies are, not so good. Again, nothing big, nothing large scale, not too many properties which are even really on a manageable scale, as y'all know. Katy Prairie, Atwater, CLYMER, a few others, but not enough. Next slide. And this is the same thing by county, and it kind of tells the same story. There's quite a bit of conservation out there, but it is very, some counties are a lot more equal than others, and really just a few of them. Again, West Texas and a couple of coastal counties are really have the conservation land. So next slide. And protecting prairies and protecting anything. There are lots of different options, like I mentioned, lots of tricks, but they all fall into, I think, these four categories. Conservation easements, and you can have donated easements or bought. And then land acquisition, fee simple. And again, you can have private agencies or entities that are doing that, like Galveston Bay and Katy Prairie and the Nature Conservancy and HNPAT. And you've got public land acquisition, and that is an important strategy, but it's limited, of course, to places where the federal or state or local governments have authorized efforts to protect land. Next slide. I think I've got an example of each one of the four legs of the stool, hopefully. And these are all prairies, and they're all pretty recent. And this first one, I've told this story before, but I'll tell it again because it's a great story. This gentleman, Clarence Temple, called us on the phone, and he was a donor, us being the Nature Conservancy in this case. And he called us on the phone. He had heard about a thing called a conservation easement, and he thought he might be interested, he and his family, in doing this. And he called, and the phone rang. It's my phone, and that doesn't even always happen. Sometimes the call doesn't even get to me. So it was kind of random, and kind of it described what he had. And he was actually more interested in his woods. He said he had some really great woods his family property up near Paris, and also a really nice lake, and wanted to know if we would be interested in conservation easement. Couldn't say. I promised to come look at it, and then the matter sort of sat for a little while. And then next time I was in the greater Paris area, I called him, and he was there, and I went out there, and I drove into his gate, not knowing what to expect. You know, you never know until you see a place what's going to be there, you know, resource-wise, if anything, and you don't know. So I drove in the gate. I couldn't find him. He was actually somewhere off the property, and I drove around for a minute, and then I called our mutual friend Jason Singhurst, and I said, Jason, I don't know what's going on here, but I just drove in the gate, and I've been driving around for 20 minutes in a giant Sylvius dropseed prairie. And he was like, dude, send me a picture. And so y'all know Jason. So I actually went out and grabbed a few grasses and put them on the dashboard, and took a picture and texted it to him, and he was like, dude, that's a Sylvius dropseed prairie. And I was like, I know. And then I found the landowner, and I told him what he had, and you know, he sort of took the meadow for granted. I mean, it's a great hay meadow, but you know, he had no idea that it was a globally rare resource. How would he know? You know, and that's not commonly accessible information. So we spent, you know, a couple hours in the prairie and the woods. The woods are beautiful too, and went from there. And he and his family completed the conservation easement in December with the Nature Conservancy, and it's got the prairie remnant, and then it's got the woods around it. It's a big enough tract that it kind of gives you the whole landscape context. It's a good tight conservation easement, and it's it's about an hour to DFW. So, you know, this is very valuable property in every way, and really great people and great partnership. And this is an example of how a donated conservation easement can accomplish some pretty lofty conservation goals. And that's the prairie there. You know, I could talk for a while about what it's got botanically, but I don't know if y'all want me to get into that. But it's, you know, those Sylvius dropseed prairies are very diverse. Generally speaking, prairies that have a mix of upland and wetland habitats are more diverse, more species rich. And those Sylvius dropseed prairies, they get a ton of rain up there. So it's, you know, it's pretty high numbers of species. It does have some really good forbs, like the Platanthera lacea is up, Lacera is up there. You've got, Suzanne's asking what kind of woods. The woods are pretty much post oak savanna. That would be the matrix. But they're in real good, they're very intact. And you do get some forbs up there in the ground layer that you don't get anywhere else in the post oak savannas, because you're practically in Oklahoma, and you do start getting up into that flora that is more characteristic of the southern Midwest, I guess. But yeah, you get physostesia, you get a lot of well, anyway, a lot of sage, every kind of sage. It's a very wet prairie, so you get a lot of graminoid diversity. I guess the next slide. Okay, this is the BARTUSH Ranch, which we saw a minute ago, and this is a purchased conservation easement. This is that category, and we did a bunch of purchased conservation easements last year. It's kind of our biggest go-to at the moment, and largely because of Farm Bill. Some other organizations have actually probably been doing Farm Bill programs easements longer than I have, but kind of got into it recently, but have really found that it is a great tool. And this easement was finished in January, and this was some capital stacking, because we used the Farm Bill program, which is administered by NRCS, so that's federal government. And we also use the parallel conservation easement program that's administered by TPWD. And it was at GLO, and then it moved to TPWD. And it's still, that program is still building. It's funded every biennium by the ledge, and it could be better funded than it is. So write your representative. We need more money, but it's been funded to the tune of $2 million per biennium for 2 years. And it's been very valuable because, among other things, it's a very flexible program. TPWD is a great partner, but also we can use it as match for the NRCS funding, which is required, or at least was required. Not to get too far into it, but the new Farm Bill actually does eliminate some of the match requirement. But match is always good to have, and cash in general is necessary for purchasing conservation easements. And the more funding programs you can mix, the stronger your chances of actually doing a deal. And the deals are hard to do. It is something that, I never appreciated until I started doing it, just how difficult it is to make the money and the timing work with the landowner's wishes. This is a fantastic ranch, the BARTUSH Ranch. Again, it's on the Oklahoma state line. You can see that is Oklahoma in the background. And it is hilltop prairie and in Cook County. So it's a little bit shallower soil. That meant that you didn't have the plowing that you had in the Blackland. And there is a bit more prairie in that landscape, but really intact prairie is hard to find because you've got overgrazing, and you've got fragmentation, and you've got all the usual problems. So, this is 1,500 acres. It's mostly prairie and savanna, just an amazingly intact landscape. Jason went up to this one too and rediscovered a echinacea, which had not been seen in Texas since the 19th century. It has since been seen again, but so that kind of speaks to the intact nature of this property. And it also speaks to the management, which has been really good. The BARTUSH family, they've managed the property very responsibly. They do have, it is a cattle operation. They do have lease hunting. So, it is a moneymaker as well, but just the sheer diversity and the intactness of the property is just really stunning. Some of y'all may even know Bill BARTUSH, of course, who's been with the Forest Service and Fish and Wildlife Service, and he's a big part of our community. So this is again about an hour from the Metroplex, and it's a different prairie type, but it is a it's a great property. And no, Suzanne, this is not Echinacea atra rubens, though that is also, it's there. It is Paradoxa variety neglecta, I believe. Yeah, it's really fascinating plant because it looks it looks enough like some of the other echinacea, some of the other prairie coneflowers that Jason's pretty much convinced that there have actually been a few places where it was overlooked, and one of them being the Bolgiano Prairie in Farmersville in Collin County, which is certainly one of the best remnants that we haven't been able to protect yet, and it's covered with coneflowers. That thing is insane with coneflowers, and Jason thinks they may actually be the neglected coneflower. But anyway, do y'all have any questions at the moment?
David, this is Mary Waters. How often do you get offered property that the Nature Conservancy has to turn down that you can't utilize?
Well, all the time, but I wouldn't say that we turn it down exactly, but what I usually just tell people is that since we are everywhere and nowhere, because we don't have the staff capacity in many places, but to do everything that we would like to do. So because of that, I I do tell people, and they've usually already heard this before they get to us, that we kind of try to focus on larger scale projects. And fortunately, we have partners that we can steer them to. And because of my involvement with HNPAT, if it's a prairie property, I usually steer them to HNPAT, and then I'm still in the conversation, and that's a nice thing. So it's a good question. Next slide. Not a prairie, but it is actually, because it's coastal grassland. And this was all I could come up with as far as public land acquisition, but in the last 6 months to a year. But this is a incredibly exciting project that my colleague, Jeff Francel, completed last year. And it was in three pieces, separate pieces, on South Padre Island. And this landscape, for those of y'all who have been down there, of course, it's condos in South Padre Island, but once you get past the condos, it's about 40 miles of completely unspoiled beach and bay and flats and mangroves and coastal grasslands. And some of that property was actually about 25,000 acres, in fact, was acquired by the Nature Conservancy and transferred to the Fish and Wildlife Service back in 2000 and something, 2000, I think, roughly. That was Carter Smith that did that project. And, you know, fantastic project, but there were still quite a lot of in-holdings. The three largest in-holdings we were able to purchase last year and add to the Fish and Wildlife Service holdings down there. And we used money from the oil spill. And like I always say, usually when we're able to do something good, it means that something bad happened before, and this is no exception. The funding came from the Deepwater Horizon spill, but you know, the amount of good that we've been able to get out of the Deepwater Horizon spill has been amazing, and has made the lemons out of the lemonade out of the lemons there. Powderhorn Ranch, obviously that acquisition, 17,000 acres, was done with Deepwater money, and we're still adding to that. We also used the Deepwater money this year to acquire some more land in the valley on the Bahia Grande, which is in Cameron County as well, but not prairie, so I didn't include that. But but this is coastal grassland, and so it's seacoast bluestem and paspalums and sea oats and all of those things, and very intact. Nothing's been done to it since it was ranched decades ago. And valley is fast growing place, and adding to conservation land down there is something we will not be able to do for too much longer. Next slide. And then private land acquisition. And obviously this is an HNPAT project. And this is a great example of partnerships. This is a great example of using funding to purchase conservation interest. And it's complicated, like they all are. And but basically this one came about, Jason gets mentioned one more time on this one, because he was the first person to reach out to these landowners, as far as I know, as far as I can remember. And he went and saw them because he had, I guess, looked at the aerials and figured out that, maybe even done a drive-by and figured out that there, you know, might be some intact prairie on this landscape. This is near the town of New Boston, which is west of Texarkana. It's in the same county as Texarkana, Bowie County. And so this is pretty far east and it's pretty far north, and had kind of escaped notice, I guess, for Texas until fairly recently, because it's sort of up there on the edge. But it does have significant amount of prairie. Like Dr. Temple's property, this is Sylvia's dropseed prairie, slightly different but similar. And there are some other Sylvia's dropseed prairies that we have been able to conserve in recent years. Many of y'all know B.F. Hicks and have seen the Daphne Prairie, and that is a giant remnant of Sylvia's dropseed prairie, 900 acres worth. This one is is not quite as large. It's 360 acres with 130 acre meadow, but that's still large, and it looks large when you get out in it. And it's incredibly diverse. And Kirsty actually posted some photos this week or last week on Facebook when she just got back from doing her annual visit inspection, and it was really doing its thing. And you know, this is just the start. These these coneflowers. It is a wall of color, and it has been again beautifully managed by one family for a very long time. Hay production, and that usually is the story with the best native prairie remnants as we know, or many of the best prairie remnants as we know. That it was hay, because other I guess other uses, even grazing, you know, grazing doesn't permanently degrade a prairie, but it does skew it in different directions, and it encourages management toward different goals. And you know, generally just cutting it once or twice a year seems to be the most rewarding kind of method. Obviously, some of our original CLYMER meadow tracks, TNC's CLYMER tracks, were hay meadows, and could name a lot of other examples. But this is the Talbots. The Talbots own a lot of land in that county. They were hyper aware of what they had. They you know, they grew up, the David and John Talbot, who are the Talbot brothers, who sold us the meadow. They grew up even before the family owned the property. They grew up managing it, and the family leased it. So this property has been part of their lives for their entire lives, and they were aware that they had something special that played into the scenario, because they were able to they were willing to wait for us for the many years that it took to actually secure this funding. The funding comes from a mitigation settlement, natural resource damage settlement, which is NRDA. So this is a private funding source, but it is managed by state agencies. Not going to go too far into it, but it was a competitive process. I submitted the application for this funding 3 years ago, and we closed the acquisition in November. We just closed the easement last week or the week before, I can't remember. So, and when I say easement, I actually mean TNC. So HNPAT is going to own and manage this property going forward. TNC is going to hold the easement. We will be a partner in management. I think Brandon Belcher may have joined the call, and he may have actually been on Talbot Prairie today. I think but you know, this property is a true win. I don't want to forget to mention the fact that, by the way, it also does have a, you know, large forest component, and the woodlands up there are very nice in their own way. Also, like the prairies, they are very transitional with Arkansas and Oklahoma. So, you know, in addition to having just being very species rich, there's a lot of species on this property which we don't really have elsewhere in Texas, and so that's a plus. And one of them is a paintbrush, actually, which was discovered by Matt White. I mean, it wasn't discovered, but it was first observed in Texas, discovered in Texas, on this property on the Talbot Prairie. So,
David,
yeah.
we've got a couple questions that have come in. From Lan Shen is asking, how many new acres does TNC protect in a typical year? If you have a typical year, and if not, how many acres did you protect last year?
So great question. And I actually I spent some time number crunching this lately, because we've been going through some transitions. We have our state director has left. We have no state director at the moment. So we have sort of interim management, and we're trying to, you know, you always have to tell them what we do. And so this is a great time to do that, because we had a great year last year. by any metric, and it was really because some of these projects and some others that I haven't mentioned that have been running for years and years kind of finally came to fruition, Talbot being one of them. And so last year we protected 30,000 acres in Texas.
Wow.
And perhaps more impressively, and my colleague Jeff Francel likes to, he likes to talk about bucks and acres, but he really likes to talk about bucks. So I will say that we did 30,000 acres worth of conservation, but it was about $80 million worth of land. And that's pretty impressive. It's also speaks to our challenge. This is getting harder and harder with every passing year. But yeah, 30,000 acres, almost every part of the state too, not the Panhandle. We never seem to get up there, but we did some really great projects in the hill country, on the coast. As I mentioned, some great prairie projects, and also East Texas, a very significant conservation easement in East Texas and longleaf pine system, and also 7,000 acres adjacent to Guadalupe National Park in far west Texas. So all kinds of things last year. That was not a typical year, but it was but it was not a record year either. It just kind of all depends on when things finally get done. So, you know, great question, Lan. Great question.
From Matt Singer, he says, can you talk about how the opportunities for land acquisition come to TNC and how much is proactive versus reactive?
Also a great question, and you know, I might turn it back on you, Matt, but because it's probably the same story. It's, I don't know, in terms of active and passive, it's hard to say, but hard to break that down actually. More reactive than you would think. Kind of along the lines of what I was saying earlier, we do get a lot of phone calls, and it's a challenge to try to figure out how, whether it's a project for TNC, if not TNC, whether it's a project for another partner. As far as proactive, you know, in terms of just kind of cold calling, picking up the phone and calling a landowner and saying, by the way, I want to buy your property. I don't do a whole lot of that because it doesn't seem to be, you know, it's sometimes it's the way to do it, but it's a little bit problematic. You know, one thing though that we do a lot is working with partners, and quite often private landowners reach out to partner entities, local land trusts who maybe have more of a local presence, NRCS, Parks and Wildlife. You know, I mentioned the Talbot Prairie is actually a great example. I wouldn't know about that property if it weren't for Jason prospecting. And I don't know exactly how that came about, but I think he approached the landowner and just said, you know, this is, we'd be interested in getting on your property and seeing what you've got. And it goes from there. You know, the BARTUSH transaction came about because Bill BARTUSH is part of our community, our professional community. You know, it's hard to generalize. Sometimes they're looking for us and sometimes we're looking for them. And sometimes it's kind of both. And, you know, I don't even remember how it comes about, but I don't know. Does that answer the question?
And the last question that we have currently from Jim Tucker is asking, are the South Padre Island mangroves on the intercoastal waterway side of the island?
Great question, Jim. And so I have not seen these mangroves, so this is hearsay from my perspective, but I'll tell you what I've heard, which is, you know, black mangroves, of course, are pretty abundant now in the mid and lower coast, because we don't really seem to have any freezes anymore, and hard freezes. But my understanding is that there's actually 3 different kinds of mangroves which have colonized the lower coast, Texas coast, just in the last 10, 15 years or less. Button mangrove is in places, white mangrove is in places, and red mangrove is in places. And I have not seen these things, but I've heard about them. Our attorney actually was fishing in the Laguna Madre last month and mentioned that he saw them in a, I guess I think it was just in a washover. So I get the sense they're not really growing out in the bay. They're actually just kind of growing on the flats or on the bay margins. It's just it's a fairly new thing, and it's a sign of how times are changing for Texas climatically, biologically, I guess. That's all I know about that. I think we got one more, maybe one or two more slides. So CLYMER Meadow, I could let Brandon tell this story, but I'll tell it. This is another example of private land acquisition. This is TNC and HNPAT, once again working together. But the roles are reversed. And I actually could also mention Matthews Prairie in the same connection, because of course Matthews Prairie, a couple of years ago, we were able to acquire in fee simple. TNC had an easement forever, but an easement with a native prairie, you know, conservation easement is great. It doesn't quite get you there because it doesn't necessarily guarantee proactive, positive management, which prairies require. So we were very fortunate that HNPAT was able to buy the surface and TNC holds the easement. This is the other way around. This tract TNC owns and HNPAT holds the easement, which helped to facilitate the acquisition because this was also a NERDA project, another mitigation project, which we pitched to them. And that's an interesting process because NERDA is actually several agencies working together, GLO, Parks and Wildlife, TCEQ, notably, because it's a pollution settlement, mitigation settlement, sometimes others. And so they identify penalties from when someone spills something nasty or does something, similar at a facility or something. And usually they try to keep it in the area where the incident occurred. And then they go shopping for a conservation project. Or again, it's kind of the same thing, give or take thing. You know, maybe we happen to talk to them and say, hey, we've got this need. It usually works the other way around. This was one where they had a long-standing contract with us to mitigate for a pollution event, and it was in North Texas in the CLYMER Meadow vicinity, and so we were able to identify a piece of property which we had wanted to conserve actually since I was in high school. And we actually got the first appraisal on this thing back in 1992 or something like that. And here we are now. We finished it very recently. It's 56 acres. It is adjacent to the CLYMER Meadow Preserve, so it was a logical thing for us to acquire and own. Brandon now manages it, and HNPAT holds the conservation easement, which was a requirement of the NERDA deal. So in a sense, that was necessary. Well, both organizations were necessary to make this deal happen. We were also able to make our neighbor very happy by acquiring her property. She's getting up in years, and she had, been our neighbor for many, many years, always known what we did and liked what we did, but had managed her own property, but, now saw that this was the right time to let it go and sell it to us. So this was win-win. And an example of how public funding can enable private land conservation. Next slide. Last slide. So that's the presentation, and I went fast and covered a lot of ground, but let me know if you have any other questions about any of these projects or any other projects we've done in the last couple of years, or anything related to TNC or HNPAT.
David, thank you so much. That was great. Beth Clark is asking, what is the minimum acreage that TNC might be interested in?
well, there's no magic formula on that. I would say that I mean, 100 acres is a nice round number, but there might be cases where we could go less than that. Certainly, if it's adjacency, like with the tract I was just talking about. But also, you know, if you can accomplish the goals of resource protection with less acres, then by all means, you know, Deer Park Prairie kind of comes to mind here, right? You know, it's all we're going to ever get. We wish it could be bigger, but we weren't going to turn it down because of its size. I mean, it's, you know, it's too unique, and that goes for some other things as well. You know, other kinds of unique habitats.
Let's see, Steve Benigno is asking, have you worked with NRCS CRP grasslands or regional conservation partnership programs or the CGRIP program to acquire lands?
The short answer is no, I have not. Not aware that that too many people have done too much with CRP in Texas. Think of a couple. RCPP is a more esoteric program because it uses funding from it pulls funding from other programs, and it's kind of a way of repackaging projects that are actually funded through other programs like EQIP and the easement programs. And I have been involved in some RCPPs. Or at least one, the most successful one to date in Texas actually is kind of ongoing, and it's in the Hill Country. And the Hill Country Conservancy got the project funded or approved, but the funding comes through these other programs, and and they've been really great about involving TNC and other partners. I think RCPP is really got a lot of potential in Texas, and we need to identify some other geographies. And then I think the way it could work is just identifying the geography, leaving the property somewhat open-ended, and then going out and trying to secure, for example, coastal prairies within an identified number of counties, you know, and then we go and try to actually identify and work with the individual landowners and do easements or do EQIP or whatever, you know, restoration as well.
David, you mentioned with the Galveston project acquiring that property and then turning it over to the state. Is that because the Nature Conservancy just can't manage all the property that it saves, like just a manpower issue, or were there other benefits for turning over the properties when you do that?
I think that it's good to conserve property in as many ways as we can. I think that, you know, there is no gold standard because all land managers have their strengths and weaknesses. But in that particular case, and in some particular cases, I think I mentioned early on that with public funding, public land acquisition, the constraint is that it can only be spent in places where Congress or you know, the federal government has approved doing it. And where we have that in Texas, we sort of feel like that's the logical strategy because frankly, we don't have that many places. And, you know, and some of the coastal wildlife refuges, you know, where Fish and Wildlife Service has been authorized to work, they're the logical partner. They have the resources. And so quite a bit of what we do is try to get land into their ownership down there. In some cases, TNC might be an more appropriate manager than an agency. It kind of depends on the case, but if there's an agency around, you know, that's the logical partner. And I do quite a bit of work with the city of San Antonio. Jeff does a lot of work with city of Austin, and what we do is try to get landowners together with them and their programs, which are, you know, mostly easement programs. So, you know, when you have a strong partner, lean on the partner. Where you don't, then maybe it's TNC or HNPAT or another land trust.
Well, we don't have any additional questions. If anyone has any other questions for David, please go ahead and type them in the chat. Otherwise, David, well, thank you very much. Can you give us any idea when your book's going to come out?
No,
Well, let us know.
it's a book. No, I mean, we're working on it.
Great.
We're working on it, and I will put in a plug because it is going to be a picture book. And I'm not actually a botanist, y'all know that. So, for me to write a book about botany is a little bit of a stretch. I'm not a photographer either, but Matt Buckingham is on board, so that part's pretty much covered. But I do want to stress that we're going to be definitely wanting to solicit input from photographers. And yes, I am still seeking lots of photos of native plant communities in Texas, and also your knowledge and wisdom about native habitats. And so many of y'all know these landscapes way better than I do. And I can't also want to give a shout out to probably my oldest botanical friends in Texas, John and Liz Ward, who are, I think, on the call. So, I'm really looking forward to spending more time in this book and having some great conversations and visits with all of the wonderful botanists that are out there in Texas.
That's great, David. We will look forward to it. We want to thank you very much for this presentation. We really enjoyed it. Oh, Ray Conroe is asking where to send photos.
Yeah, you can send to my TNC email, or at least, email me there and we can go from there. I mean, obviously this isn't a TNC project, but that's usually the easiest way to start.
Okay.
Yeah, thanks for that.
Beth, just so everyone will know, Beth Clark posted that if anyone needs any CEU credits for professional registration, just reach out to us and we can send you a certificate. David, thank you very much. We've recorded the meeting and we will be posting it on our website. So again, keep an eye on our newsletter and we'll keep you up to date and let you know what's coming up. Thanks so much.